Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show to talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season finale of Coroner. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, obviously, we're continuing where last week's episode left off, obviously, with Peterson's murder, and obviously, it just kind of being the hard thing of like, oh yeah, it's kind of a little bit different when it's actually someone you know. Obviously, immediately, McAvoy knows exactly who it was. He knows that it was Gerald that was behind this. But also it begs the question, like, why did he do it? Because part of me was wondering, is it because he fit like the people you go after, like homeless people and stuff like that? But I was like, maybe his situation was a little more dire than he made it seem out. Like, that's what I was wondering. But obviously, like, Jeannie's distracted by, like, she's seeing the dog, she follows it, and then there's stuff about her childhood, and immediately it's like, because she ends up talking about, like, oh, when she talks to her therapist about it, because she had a panic attack looking at it, because it was like a newsletter thing talking about her dad was kind of like, there were suspicions about him being responsible for his other daughter's death. So obviously that sends her in a bit of a panic attack, because she already knows her dad was lying about it, and she's trying to figure out why, but she's talking to like her therapist about it, and he's like, oh, I see now you've been digging into your past. She's like, no, my former partner was, and that made me go, right, that was Peterson. So I was like, Peterson was looking into it? Part of me was like, obviously we know he brought it up like last episode that he was actually going to sue her, so I was wondering if he was actually going to look into some dirt on her and he was going to use that to his advantage. I was like, oh, that's a little scummy. But regardless of all that, obviously, like, she's dealing with all that while they're also investigating this, because obviously she has to talk to, Dwayne, Dr. Allen about the fact is we got to treat this body like any other body. And, River's like, yeah, that's what Peterson would want. So they look at one of his ribs and it looks like there's writing on it. So they look and they think it's the word knit. But then the bone from the pig bones, that's actually a human bone, it has an eye on it has an eye or something on it, and it's like, wait, it's a Roman numeral. So Peterson is number 24, because his is written in Roman numerals, so it's like, we're dealing with a serial killer here. So now it turns into this whole thing of like, obviously they got to figure this whole thing out about, okay, so we're dealing with a serial killer, we got to find out where this bone came from, because obviously coyotes probably got to it, so obviously we won't get the direct direction of where like the body was. But at the same time, Jenny's dealing with that. She's also juggling with the fact is Ross is high as a kite because he was eating edibles, and I love that while he was carrying around his dad's ashes, he sees the previous owner. I'm like, oh, you're high as shit, you're literally seeing a dead lady. She's like, oh, but come on, Ross, the man at the house now, you should be taking, be feeding these birds and stuff like that, So even he's kind of like, okay, I'm losing my mind a little bit. So Jenny ends up bringing him along to work, and obviously, like, Allison's like, I've literally got a bun in the oven. The last thing I need is to deal with a kid on the outside too, especially when it's high as a kite. And she's like, damn it. So she's telling Ross to stay in the car while she investigates. And that led to this interesting thing because obviously they end up talking to Tiny, and I love the adorable thing about like him being like, okay, when he was younger, he can only handle a tiny bit of spice. But obviously it's like, there's one patch of like this field that has like flowers growing, so it's like probably from decom, and McAvoy's gotta be like, yeah, this flower patch that he talks about, the fact is my wife called it a miracle place, so she wanted to take care of these flowers, which is it's beautiful yet sad, because like he says like after his wife died he couldn't bring himself to get rid of them, so it's sad because it's like, oh, those miracle flowers, yeah, they were born on top of a dead body, which is kind of like, oh, and I love him being like, whoa, what me, like immediately. But it was kind of sad when they were excavating the body and stuff like that, and Dr. Allen was kind of having a breakdown, and he kind of gets mad at Jenny because he's saying, like, this is your fault, he died because you fired him, and then it's like, oh. Well, I mean, it's sad. It's sad because, like, it's messed up that he's putting that on Jenny, because I'm sure she already feels a little bit of guilt. It's like, I mean, who's to say things weren't going to... Well, actually, things would have played out like that anyway, because he would have come after Peterson anyway. But you can also make the argument the blame could still technically fall on Jenny because she opened up so many of his cases. Because she was asking, like, because it's like, for Alan, it's like, he's the one that gave me the chance. He was kind of the one that saw something in me and gave me this position. And it's like, he was a great man. Obviously, like, his work was lacking more recently. But, before that, he was a legend. And then she's like wondering, why did his work suffer? And we still never got an answer for that. Because, like I brought up before, I think there was a lot more to his story. Like, he made it seem like him and his wife just got divorced. I think there was a lot more to it. Like, either something related to their child. Because he said, like, his child's, like, made it sound like she was, like, off at college. Or maybe she's even older now. He made it seem like that was around the time his child was at college, and obviously he was going through divorce and stuff like that. But I think it's like there was a death situation that he hadn't, because like he was just so reluctant to deal with. Because remember, he got pissed because Jenny, it's like, don't you dare try to bring up my issues when you're not even dealing with your own. So, I mean, it's sad as hell because they worked together really well, but obviously that was the circumstances created from his deception, and it's like they didn't end up on the best notes. Their final time together was her just kicking him out, him yelling at her yelling at him type of thing, you know, so... Which is almost a little interesting because obviously, like, that kind of almost plays into, like, the story between Ross and his mom this episode. Because Ross, being high, is trying to remember that. Because the moment we flash back to that moment with his dad, I was like, that's the day he died, isn't it? And it's, like, at his swim meet, like, when his dad died, you know? And obviously his dad's telling him, it's like, because of the way we look, because of people like us, we got to be better, we got to be stronger, we got to be faster, we got to always be smarter. Like, basically, life is always going to hold you back because of the way you look. People won't give you the chances that you deserve because you look the way you do. So it's like, you got to fight tooth and nail, you got to be better than everyone else, you know? And he's like, I'm only pushing you so hard because I won't be here forever, and I'm going to push you so you... And it's one of those things that, like, you know, when your parents say something to you, you're just kind of like, yeah, whatever. But the moment, like, now his dad's gone and he'd give anything to hold on to those words, because he's like, what did you say, Dad? Because he started worrying, like, what if I'm forgetting everything that Dad ever said to me, you know? So he was kind of chasing after his dad and kind of falls in the field, and, you know, Jenny comes, sits beside him. Lays beside him, actually. And it was this beautiful moment of him being like, remembering, like, you know, it's like Dad giving those speeches he gave before, but he's like, this time I just kind of ignored him, and that's the day he died, and it's just like, I'm worried if what I'm going to end up forgetting him. But Jenny's like, you won't, you remember everything. Because it's like, obviously this is him remembering that last day, the last moment he had with his dad, and he's like asking Jenny, like, does she remember? Jenny's like, yeah, she remembers the last moment together. It was that morning, and it was like, before he dropped Ross off, they were arguing. Like, their last moment together before everything was them arguing, you know? And it was about, the fact is, they were lying about the fact is, like, not telling Ross the truth about the fact is that they were getting a divorce. So obviously we knew the relationship was kind of bad. That's even before Jenny ended up finding out all that stuff about him after he died. They just had their issues beforehand, but... It was, you know, kind of sad that that's kind of like your final memory. I mean, sadly, that's just kind of how life is, but it's just like, you know, things, it didn't have to be bad. It could have just been like, yeah, they weren't in love anymore, and just they just weren't, you know, the same people. Like, they could have just, you know, it could have obviously been in like an amicable thing, but, you know, it's just, you never had that opportunity, that chance, you know. It's just kind of sad. It's just always that thing of like, you got to cherish the people you love, you know, while you have them, because you never know when you can lose them, you know? But obviously, like, going back to what I was saying before, it just kind of sucked about all that Peterson stuff kind of getting thrown in. But it's obviously for Alan, he talks about it to McAvoy. It's like, he makes, dealing with all the death that he's dealt with, he even talks about the fact is, like, that's why Peterson was the way he was. Like, he just dealt with death all the time. And that's just because Alan was kind of projecting, because he's dealing with death. Like, he spent so much time, you know, separating. He's like, my life is full of, like, beauty and art. Like, he surrounds his personal life with so much beautiful stuff. And obviously, then he has work, but he makes sure to separate the two. And now those worlds are colliding, because obviously he's taken the Peterson thing very personal, because it was someone he knew. It's one thing for it to be someone you don't have an attachment to. When it's someone that you know that's dead in front of you, it changes the whole situation. So in this moment, his personal life and his professional life bled together, you know, to a certain extent, you know. And I think that's a hard thing for anyone to kind of deal with. And even dealing with things, kind of circling back to Ross and Jenny, he talked about the fact is he's been, you know, medicating himself of, like, you know, getting high since his dad died. It's like, I'm dealing with it kind of the same way you are. She's like, oh, so you've seen the pills? He's like, yeah. But obviously for her, it's like, you got me, I'm not going anywhere, so you need to like stop with the medicating. Like, that's not the best way to handle things. And I think Jenny knows that from her own personal experience, because not necessarily helping her deal with everything, you know. But it's interesting when we dive into this investigation further and further, because, we also got an answer to the whole Peterson situation, why Peterson was chosen, because Gerald, it's like, you guys put fake evidence on me, so it was meant to be like a middle finger to Peterson. That's why it was so personal, because that's why I'm like, why go after Peterson? Especially because, like, most of his other victims were people that were just, quote-unquote, not going to be missed, because even, you know, McAvoy made a point, like, You killed most people on your runs, but this time you killed someone that quote unquote matters. You know, so it's like, which is kind of sad that like a person can be categorized as like, oh, because of his position and the life he led, Peterson sadly mattered more because people would look more into his death than they would other people that were murdered by him. You know, these people that might have been homeless and stuff like that. So that's sad in its own right. But it's because of that, which is like, obviously he's guilty of sin, but he still went to jail because he's like, no, I was so careful. There's no way you had any actual evidence on me, so you had to plant evidence. So I'm a say screw you guys for taking away some of my life, even though I am this serial killer, you know, this killer and this serial killer. Because at the time they only got him on one body, because obviously they didn't know about all the bodies that have his name on it. So when that's all said and done, though, when they investigated, they ended up, you know, investigating the body. They noticed some of the stuff with it, and it turns out that this body is actually Gerald's dad's body, which I love. Prior to that, we got a little levity in the episode where we had T and Malik talking about like, it's like, nah, you know, it's like he's trying to get McAvoy to invest in something, but it's like, no, I'm his favorite. And she's like, no, you're not. I am. It's like, you know why I'm his favorite? Because, you know, what does he know about you? He knows this, that you eat the same hot dog from the same place, yada, 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 so on and so forth. That your mom actually liked your girlfriend more than she likes you. Me, he doesn't know anything. He doesn't know this and this about me, but he know what he does know? That I'm a damn good detective and everything. So it's like, that's why I'm his favorite. I mean, he even gives me a nickname. And then when they figured out the whole thing, they're both trying to call him at the same time. He's like, good job, Malik, T-Rex. He's like, yeah, I'm thinking more like M-Rex. And he ends up hanging up beforehand. So it's like, yeah, she's definitely his favorite. But I just love that little banter and moment they had between each other. I thought that was kind of a nice little levity in the episode. There's also the cute thing between Liam when he's trying to confess to Jenny. He's like, yeah, I'm not dating anyone else. He's like, I want to talk about this. He's like, I want us to basically be more. And she's like, oh, because it almost kind of comes out of nowhere. But for her, it's a thing of like, you know, she's just like, I got basically a lot on her mind. So she's processing all of that. So, but obviously we end up finding out like his dad had tuberculosis, and because of that, I guess it can be technically like a genetic thing. So what they found on that tissue that was in Peterson's mouth was related to that. So it's like, if we can correlate like what was found on his dad's body with him, with what was found in Peterson's mouth, it shows the correlation. It's basically like DNA evidence proving that Gerald was behind it. And what I thought was so interesting, the entire time they kept pointing to like Sully. I was like, why are we paying so much damn attention to this dude? Because like they keep focusing on him. I was like, thought it was weird. And then at one moment, because I was like, is he going to be a bad guy or something? I was like, I don't get this. And then he like turns around and it's revealed to be Gerald underneath. I was like, oh, okay. So at some point he killed Sully in replace. I was like, yeah, because it didn't make sense. Because when you look back at the scene, you're like, why the hell do they keep focusing on Sully? It's like, is Sully supposed to be someone important? He's not even talking in the scene. That's why I didn't get it. But that's why, because they want you to notice when they switch. Because they make it pretty apparent. Because when you see him turn around, it's like, oh, that's definitely Gerald. He just, obviously with the suits on and the mask, it's like not like you could tell who's who, you know. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting development. But for it to be, you know, Peterson, even in his last moments, ended up, you know, grabbing that evidence and swallowing it, so it won't be, you know, he gave, you know, it's like he was a great pathologist even to the end, making sure to preserve some evidence that could, you know, take down his killer. So obviously, like, McAvoy ends up finding out about the real Sully and everything. They end up going back to that place and finding his body, because Tiny had found the body. And when Jenny's going to, like, you know, deliver the evidence and stuff like that herself, but then she gets confronted by Gerald. And I thought was interesting, it turns out, in fact, he's actually the one that left that. Not Peterson wasn't looking into her past like that. He was, because he's like, oh, you're kind of opening up my past, so I decided to look into yours. And it's like, oh, we're kind of the same. Like, could we end up finding out like why he killed his dad? Because prior to that, he had lost his mom, and obviously he was pissed at his dad because it's like, oh, my dad, he couldn't take care of me. He could barely even keep a roof over our heads. And it's like, oh, but your dad, he whittled that wooden toy for. He's like, no, I did that. Basically, kind of showing for him, it's like I had to take care of myself. I had to find a way to kind of make it through this world because my dad was kind of a failure. And it's just kind of like, he's like, because Jenny's trying to make him say, like, you know, it's like, oh, your dad did love you. He wasn't kind of like the bad father you make him out to be. I mean, we will never know, but it's like that's kind of where it all started. him, that was his first kill and everything, but Jenny won't give over evidence, so he ends up talking about the fact is your dad potentially killed your sister. Don't you want to kill him? And she's like, no, he didn't. It was the dog. It was and he was like, yeah, sure. But he's like, you're just like me. And he ends up stabbing her. But the whole experience triggered something in her mind because as she was crawling away, she looks in her reflection and sees the doll and remembers that she's the one that killed her sister by accident, and they were struggling over something, and she fell backwards. So immediately, it is what I figured as much with what was set up of like, why would her dad lie about that? They're saying like, when she started piecing it together, and what he was saying last episode, it made me think she was the one that accidentally killed her sister, and she just blocked it out. It turns out that's the case. He killed the dog because he wanted to fit the narrative of like, oh yeah, like he probably told the authorities and everything. It's like, yeah, the dog killed her. It was an accident, so I put the dog down. Like he had to make it seem, or at the very least, maybe he made it seem like the dog ran away. So he made the dog disappear. Maybe that's what that's supposed to be. Either way, he was trying to create this narrative. So obviously even he got some of the blame, but as long as it pulled it away from Jenny, he was okay. Luckily, McAvoy shows up in time to put Gerald down, so obviously it's like you got stabbed, then Allison's there, and she's like, oh yeah, I was just with Sabina, we're on a date and everything, but it's like, do you need anything? Maybe, trying to help her breathe and everything. It's like, no, I'm good, I thought that was kind of neat, just Allison being there for her. But obviously, we get that like 2-week time skip, and she's there with her dad, and she's like, I remember everything. For him, it's like, you were so young, like you didn't speak for a couple days, but then eventually you never brought it up. So he's like, I thought you blocked it out or you didn't remember. For him, it's like, I wanted to be the one to carry Katie's ghost. I never knew you. He just wanted to do what he could to protect her. And it's like, obviously she understands. She has a son of her own. That she'd do anything to protect him because obviously she did that. Like she protected him, tried to protect him from the fact is of like the complicated relationship her and David had. But obviously, he ended up knowing the truth. He ended up finding, because kids are a lot smarter than you kind of give them credit, no matter, they kind of see through a lot of the stuff you don't want them to. But obviously kind of showing you that obviously her dad, he had that lucid moment, but obviously he's drifting in and out, and obviously it's happening more and more. And so it's just that thing of like, that whole conversation got her thinking about like no longer carrying ghosts. It's like, now she remembers the truth, but it's like what she's going to do about it. So not carrying those ghosts. So she looks at the scars on her body, and then she takes off her ring because it's like, carrying around the ghost of David. And it's like, that's not what she wants, kind of, it's like, it's time to stop carrying these ghosts. So, and she finally takes that step further with Liam being like, she wants to give this a try. She doesn't know what it's going to be, but, she wants to still give it a try. Now, what was interesting, though, is we see Liam cutting the wiring, that trap. He was like making it like I figured as much when he brought it up to Jenny beforehand. He was like, oh, it was going to be nothing. It's like, you wouldn't have stopped her if it was really going to be nothing, because it turns out it's a stun grenade, so it's a lot serious. So much like Jenny's dealing with her ghost, he still hasn't quite dealt with his, but maybe the fact is he got rid of the trap is proof of that, because I think for him, he's willing to take a step forward, and because he's willing to give a shot with this whole thing with Jenny, like he's kind of ready to leave his demons behind. Now, will they be able to? Who knows? Like, I mean, who knows if Jenny's going to be 100% able to, I mean, that's probably why she is the way she is, like, when it comes to this whole death situation, because, like, that trauma from such a young age, it probably messed with her. Even though she didn't remember, it existed there subconsciously. That's what this whole dog thing was about. She's been seeing the dog since her husband died, because I think seeing him die and being in front of him, not feeling like you can do anything, I think it took her back to that, like, helplessness of when it happened with her sister, and it triggered that trauma, and that's what it's slowly been, her mind trying to unveil that trauma that was there. It re-triggered that trauma, so I think that's how it all kind of comes full circle. I was actually kind of surprised to see all that kind of dealt with just over the course of this first season, so because it makes you wonder, like, what's next for a story. But she has that moment with Ross, because obviously it's like, let's say goodbye to your dad, but obviously Ross doesn't want to let him go yet, and she's like, it's okay. And she says her thing where it's basically like what she always says to bodies, where it's like, I see you, you see me, whether it's in life or in death, I see you, type of thing. So I thought that was kind of beautiful. Once again, I chalk that up as kind of like I see you, I recognize your existence, I see, because kind of like all that is life and death and kind of the connection of it, like I see myself It puts life in perspective, I guess, is kind of what she's going at. So don't worry, I see you, whether it's here in the life or death. Like, I see you, I recognize your existence. I know that. That's kind of what I took it from it, but nevertheless, obviously, this isn't something that's 100% dealt with. This is something they're still going to be dealing with. But obviously, it's going to be interesting to see where Jenny and Liam's relationship goes. Like I said, it's just kind of a lot of stuff is settled. So the overarching story that is kind of Jenny, I'm sure she's still going to be dealing with some of this in the future, but at least some of those ghosts are dealt with now. Obviously, there's probably going to be more in the future with all of, who knows if there's going to be more stuff with her sister or not. It seems like that chapter's closed, but maybe there'll be some more stuff dealing with the whole David thing, because obviously it's not, but obviously, like, her and Ross having people around them that care about them, that are there for them with this whole situation. So it's kind of crazy to see, the season end here, but obviously it's not going to be going for too long, because it's coming back in 2 weeks on the 7th. Which is no surprise, because once again, this is the premiere on the CW. This show came out 2019. This season in particular came out 2019. The second season had already come out and gone this year. I think it aired this year. It already ended, so they only say new episodes, but really it's the second season. The second season literally starts in like I said, 2 weeks, I believe. So that's definitely going to be interesting. There are little peaks of it, but obviously I avoided it. So it's going to be weird labeling this as a season finale, because it really is a season finale, even though the CW isn't technically acknowledging it. Because I'm wondering, because I'm sure the CW is probably going to separate them, but because this is a premiere on the network, they're not going to make a distinction television-wide. Maybe on the CW app, they might make a distinction of this is season 2, episode 1, or maybe for the CW, they'll combine them into a 16-episode season rather than the 8-episode seasons they both were. But regardless, I'm really interested to see, what Jenny's story, takes us in season 2, what cases they end up going down. Because obviously this was a pertinent case for McAvoy as well, this whole Gerald thing. But obviously they uncovered so much more. And obviously there's potential about finding his other, 22 victims and stuff like that. There's also the thing we have to think about carrying over into season 2 is Jenny going back through all of Peterson's cases and what that means now that Peterson's gone. Is that going to be a little awkward now? Maybe, maybe not. Like I said, either way, I'm curious to see what season 2 has in store for us. Season 2 that's already technically out and that's going to premiere here on CW in 2 weeks. Like I said, it's such a funny, unique situation television-wise I've never experienced before. But regardless, till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.